Hello and welcome to the latest episode of Empire Sports Talk. I am your host, Roman Gennaro. Let's get started with the world of sports right away. The NBA season is less than 1 week away. We'll have to see if the Cleveland Cavaliers can begin their defense of their championship off with a win. Good news for Cleveland fans, baseball and football. Your baseball team, the Cleveland Indians, are going to the World Series for the first time since 1997. They have not won the World Series since 1948. It's the second longest championship drought in all of sports, behind only the Chicago Cubs. And the Chicago Cubs are still in the playoffs here. They're 1 win away from advancing to the World Series against the Indians after an 8-4 win over the LA Dodgers last night. Personally, I think that an Indians-Cubs World Series would be great for the sport because those are the two longest championship droughts in all of sports. And they would be facing off against each other, guaranteed that at least one of them would end. So that would be something to look forward to. I think that, and let's not count the Dodgers out because everybody assumed that the Cubs would win this series, but the Dodgers took a 2-1 lead after 3 games in the series. So the Dodgers are not out of it yet, and we have Clayton Kershaw looming here in Game 6 or 7, either one. I'm sure we'll see him. So we can't count the Dodgers out yet, but a Cubs-Indians World Series would be really good for the sport. Again, like I said, not only for the droughts, but because the Cubs were the best team in the league all season. They were favored to win the championship all season. They had 103 wins in the regular season. It was by far the most in the league. They have probably the most explosive offense in the league, but Cleveland's pitching, defense, and overall team play has got them to be known right now as the hottest team in baseball, as they've only lost 1 game in the entire postseason. They swept the Red Sox 3-0, and they took a 3-0 lead against the Blue Jays before the Blue Jays even cracked the win column. The Blue Jays forced a Game 5 after squeaking out Game 4, but it was not the comeback was not going to happen. This was not going to be another 2004 Red Sox situation where as the Cleveland Indians closed it down in Game 5. So the Cleveland Indians have only lost 1 game, and they're doing so with some really, really good team baseball. They're playing baseball how you should. They're playing as a team, and I don't think that was ever more evident than Game 5 that they clinched, because in Game 5, Trevor Bauer was supposed to start for the Indians, but a few days before he had a finger injury while repairing a personal drone that he had, and he cut his finger a little bit and had to get, a lot, and he had to get stitches, so they stitched him up. He went out there to throw. He got through 2/3 of an inning, and the stitches opened up, and there was blood everywhere. It was a gruesome scene. So he had to be taken out after 2 outs. That means the bullpen had to work 8 1/3 innings. And they did so masterfully, with no pitcher pitching more than 2 innings in that game for the Indians, and with the defense that they were getting that game, and everything else, and the timely hitting that they seemed to get, and the mountain of a man that is, not just in stature but in stardom at this point, that is Andrew Miller. More on him later in the show. They were able to close out that series in 5 games, and they await the winner of the Cubs-Dodgers series for the 2016 World Series. This is going to be fun to watch. One thing that does bother me a little bit about the way that baseball is right now. First of all, I've voiced my opinion in the past about the wild card game. I think the wild card play-in game is silly. I do, because baseball is a sport where series need to happen, because baseball is not meant to be a one and done sport. Because baseball is a sport where anything can happen on any given day. A pitcher can have the game of his life, or the best hitter could go 0 for 5, or whatever the case is. Baseball is that kind of game, and so that's why they play 162 games that are full of series, 3-game series, 4-game series, because that's how you separate the teams that are good versus the teams that are lucky. And for there to be a one-game play-in to decide who moves on in the playoffs and who doesn't, I think is ridiculous. I think, in my opinion, even this year, the Giants played against the Mets for the play-in game this year, and I thought the Mets were a much better team, but they got outplayed in that one game, and they were eliminated. And you could argue the same thing in the American League. I thought the Orioles may have been the better team than the Blue Jays, but it's just the way it played out. And so I personally don't like the wild card game. And I'm not a huge fan of the best-of-5 series in the first round, but you can't change everything right off. But my biggest problem, and I've talked to multiple people about this over the last week, is the fact that the All-Star game determines home field advantage in the World Series. And I don't know if this is the case in the NBA, and I know the NFL, their Pro Bowl is after the season, which is a whole other thing. I don't know if that's the case in the NBA, but in the MLB, that's what it is. The winner of the All-Star game gets home field advantage in the World Series, which I believe is ridiculous because the Cubs, the Indians, while they had a really, really, really good season and they deserved to be in the World Series, the Cubs had 103 wins. The Cubs had the best record in the National League in the MLB. So it makes sense for them to get home field advantage. Now if LA manages to pull out the series against Chicago and LA goes to the World Series, it would make more sense for Cleveland to have home field advantage, because I'm unsure of their records at the time, but I'm pretty sure Cleveland had a better record. They had better control of their own division. They clinched before LA did, I believe. And so that would make sense. But for Cleveland to have potentially home field advantage over Chicago, a 103-win team, does not make any sense. I think that home field advantage should go to the team with the better record in the World Series. That's better records should be what determines home field advantage. It shouldn't be a trivial game in a neutral city where somebody on a team that may or may not make the playoffs could win MVP and determine, if their league. I mean, think about it. The Angels haven't been in the playoffs in a few years. But let's say, for instance, that Mike Trout goes out to San Diego where the All-Star game was, and he has 3 for 3, couple RBIs, and the American League wins the All-Star game. This is just a what-if situation, because that's likely. Mike Trout wins the MVP, and the AL wins the All-Star game. The AL gets home field advantage in the World Series. Let's say now that the team that gets to the World Series in the American League is not the Angels. The Angels missed the playoffs, but the team that gets to the World Series is a team that won the wild card play-in game and advanced all the way, much like the Giants had done in their championship years. Let's say Toronto had won the ALCS, beat Cleveland, and gone to the World Series. How is it fair that a team, how is it fair that if a player is the deciding factor in an all-star game, a neutral site game, and that player wins MVP, he's not on a playoff team, how is it fair that non-factor in the playoffs determines locations of playoff games? And let's say the Blue Jays had gotten to the World Series against, say, the Cubs, and you have a wild card team against a 103-win team. How does it make sense that the wild card team gets home field advantage? I'm waiting. I hear crickets. It doesn't. It doesn't make sense. So that's my big pet peeve with that. Anyway, in the NFL, the first half of the season is almost over here. The only undefeated team in the league is the Minnesota Vikings at 5-0, coming off a bye week, playing against the Eagles this week. That should be a good matchup with the Eagles going pretty strong with rookie quarterback Carson Wentz, Jordan Matthews, a pretty decent defense against the undefeated Vikings team without Adrian Peterson, without Teddy Bridgewater, and with the best defense in the league this year. So that should be a great game to watch. I'm looking forward to that. And I'm going to say my first half MVP, but my first two choices for first half MVP, NFL MVP are both on the same team, and it's Atlanta. Matt Ryan, or let's say first Julio Jones and Matt Ryan. That Julio Jones has far and away more receiving yards than any other receiver at this point. He's having a monster season, pretty much how his first half was last year. He finished with good numbers, but his first half was monstrous, and he's doing it again this year. Matt Ryan is having by far his best season so far of his career. To this point, he's been talked about as, a mid-level B quarterback. He's not elite. He's not, one of these guys. I like the guy, but I have to agree. He's not seen as a guy that can win his city a championship. But if I recall, neither was Joe Flacco when they did win the World Series. Or, sorry, wrong sport. When they did win the Super Bowl. So with the way that Matt Ryan's and Matt Ryan's always been a productive quarterback, like Drew Brees. He's always put up the yards. He's always gotten the touchdowns. But he's just not seen as that next level guy. Which, let's talk about the next level guys. Eli Manning is a next level, or is on borderline next level guy, but he has won 2 Super Bowls. But no, we're not ready to call him elite yet. I don't know. Speaking of the Falcons, and I'll talk about this later. The game with them and the Seahawks, the 2 first place teams. It was going to be a great game. 2 good defenses, 2 good offenses, both division leaders. What was going to happen? And that game came down to a pass interference call that wasn't made. That should have been. Matt Ryan had a play on 4th down. He made some mistakes on that drive. He had a play on 4th down. He went back to throw, and Julio Jones was held clearly by Richard Sherman. It was not called, and the Seahawks won that game. And more on this later, but I believe that pass interference calls should be reviewable. There's a lot of things I believe should be reviewable, but more on that later. Something that I found really, really interesting this week, and it didn't make the Ridiculous Six because I wanted to talk a little bit more about it, was the results of the 2016-2017 NBA GM poll. It was where all 30 GMs from the NBA sit down and they ask a bunch of questions going into the season. Who do you think's going to win? Who do you think's going to do this? Blah, 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 blah. And the results are put into a poll. And one of the questions that was in that poll was, if you're the GM of a new team, if you're starting a new franchise, and you have to pick one player of the entire league to start your franchise around, who would you pick? And fair question. There are a lot of good players. 48% chose Karl Anthony Towns. He's more votes than anybody else. 48%, 30. That's about 14 of the GMs chose Karl Anthony Towns. What was shocking was that LeBron James only got 17%, and Steph Curry got even less than that. Karl Anthony Towns was first. Kevin Durant was second with 20. LeBron was third with 17. Now, it's small sample size. It's 30 guys answering a question. But 83% of those guys said no to LeBron James. And I don't know how to justify that. So I did some polling of my own before this show. I sent texts out to people in my circle, and I got answers back from 12 different people, which is close to half the sample size of the GMs. And this is what they said. They said, the question I asked, first of all, was, right now, in the NBA, as it stands, who are the 2 best players in the league? Go. And I waited on their responses. And the 12 that texted back, of those 12, every single one of them said either LeBron James, Steph Curry, or both. Some of them said KD, some of them said LeBron and KD, some of them said Russell Westbrook and Steph Curry, so on and so forth. But every single one of them had something in common, that either LeBron James or Steph Curry were in their answers, or both. A few of them said both. I would also say both, that those are the 2 best players in this league. So I can't fathom why such a low percentage of the guys calling the shots in the league would start their teams with either one of these guys. Now, I understand that best player and cornerstone of franchise, build a franchise around, are 2 completely separate things. But if you're starting a franchise and you have the ability to sign anyone in the league, regardless of age, regardless of salary cap or whatever, we're talking one guy, how do you not justify a 4-time MVP or possibly one of the best shooters the NBA has ever seen? If these are the 2 best players in the league, how are they so low on this list? You could tell me, oh, LeBron's 31 years old. So what? He's 31 years old. He's mid-30s. That's like middle of career. We've seen guys like Tim Duncan go till they're 39. Guys, go till they're 39, 40 years old. If that was LeBron, that's 9 more years. He could have a 22-year career if he did that. 22. He came out of high school at 18. He's only 31. He'll be 32 this year. He's still got a lot of good years yet left. And if he started slowing down at 35, 36, he'd still be on the floor. He'd still be helping his teammates. He'd still be a player coach. Because let's not make a mistake about the fact that LeBron has been coaching for years. No disrespect to Tyronn Lue or David Blatt or Eric Spoelstra or Mike Brown, the guys that have been coaching him in his career. But he's been coaching for a long time. He can convince star players who deserve star money to take pay cuts to join him to win a championship. Not because he can't win one by himself, because he is the best player, I think the second best player in the history of the league. Kevin Love could have gotten a lot more money. Kyrie Irving, I believe, took a little bit less. J.R. Smith took a lot less than he could have gotten. He is going out and pitching these players, come over to Cleveland, we'll win a championship together, and they're saying, okay. A lot of coaches and GMs can't do that. And LeBron, in the time that he's been coaching the teams that he's been playing on, has more wins than some of the guys that are coaching. So even if he's not putting up the 26, 27 points a game that we're accustomed to LeBron putting up, he can still do so many more things for your team that doesn't involve putting the ball in the basket. So in one way or another, I don't understand how 100% of these guys didn't say LeBron. And Steph Curry, he is the cleanest, purest shooter in this league. I mean, he's got some defensive flaws. Kyrie Irving proved that, but those are the 2 best players in this league. You can argue that, but you can't argue that they're not top 5. Karl Anthony Towns is a second-year player on a lousy team. And if you put him, if you put good players around him, he's a big fish in a small pond right now. He's a great player, but he's a second-year player on a lousy team. He hasn't proved much. So how does 48% of guys pick him over LeBron? I don't get that. Anyway, let's move on to this week's Romans Ridiculous 6. Here we go. Number 1, Phillip Rivers. The reason he's on this list is I've heard a lot of chatter this last week because he's been in the league for a decade now, a little over a decade now, and I've heard a lot of chatter that he's a Hall of Fame guy. Why? That's the only thing I don't see Phillip Rivers as a Hall of Fame guy. He's been in the league, 12, however many years, and he's only made the playoffs a couple times. He did make an AFC Championship game, lost. Never been to a Super Bowl. I believe had the best record in the league once, and I was in middle school. The Chargers had the best record in the league. I was in middle school, and I don't see, and that might have been when Drew Brees was still there. So they've only been to playoffs a couple of times. They haven't had really any weapons. That's a historically bad run franchise. And his numbers aren't ever spectacular. He's gotten a good number of touchdowns in his years, but he's also thrown a lot of interceptions, lost a lot of games they could have won, so on and so forth. And this season is no different. So, number one in the Romans Ridiculous 6 is the idea that he is a Hall of Famer, and I've even heard surefire in a couple of occasions. That's ridiculous. I think Phillip Rivers has a long way to go before he's in the Hall of Fame, but that's just my opinion. Number two, and similar to number two last week, it has to do with the Dallas Cowboys. There have been a couple of guys making comments about Tony Romo this week and the situation with him and Dak Prescott. As last week I reported that the fans are clamoring for Dak Prescott to keep that starter's job. This week, Dez Bryant came out and said that he believed that it was Tony's job when Tony got back, which is noble and well and good. But let's examine real quick how that came out. Dez Bryant, albeit being injured the last couple of weeks, has a history of demanding the football, and when he doesn't get it, he complains. Dak Prescott has looked other places: Ezekiel Elliott, Cole Beasley, Terrence Williams. So Dez Bryant, in the games that he's played, has not gotten the football. Cue complaints. So while he may be voicing his true opinion, because of the reputation that he's garnered around the league, it comes off as a prima donna complaining about his own touches, and that this is an opinion that benefits him. That's a little ridiculous. The second thing that came out about that was Brett Favre. Brett Favre played almost 20 years in the league, most of which with the Packers, and he came out on the opposite side and said that if he were Tony Romo, he would step aside for the good of the team and let Dak Prescott take over. That's what Brett Favre said. If it was him, he would do that. That's garbage. That's ridiculous. Because, and I like Brett Favre, when Brett Favre was in Green Bay, they drafted Aaron Rodgers. Aaron Rodgers sat behind Brett Favre with all the talk that Aaron Rodgers was going to be the next guy in Green Bay, as he has proven to be. And Brett Favre kept saying, this is my job. He kept insisting it was his job, and he was hurt when the Packers wouldn't take him back when he retired the first time. And some reports come out this week from guys that have written books and know the Packers that he wasn't particularly nice to Aaron Rodgers when Aaron was sitting on the bench. So you're going to, after everybody knows all of that, when that was highly publicized, you're going to say that if you were in Tony's position, you would step aside? You were in Tony's position and you didn't. That's ridiculous. I love you, Brett, but that's ridiculous. Number 3, and I said I'd come back to this. Reviewable penalties. Specifically pass interference, but there are others. If there's a pass interference in a game, especially late in the game, that could decide the outcome of said game, much like Seattle versus Atlanta, why in the world is that not reviewable? 2 first-place teams. Middle of the season, it's starting to get important, more and more important to win these games. If there was ever a time for plays to be reviewable, it was in that game, and that was a clear hold That was a clear pass interference. Julio Jones goes up for the pass. He only gets one arm out because that's all he can get. It looks like he's trying to make the best play he's ever made in his life, but we look at the replay and Richard Sherman has got his other arm held down, so this is the only arm he can get up. And they let it go. Everyone in the league knew that should have been, and even the Seahawks know they got away with one, at least I hope they do, know they got away with one there. Pass interference should be reviewable. Any play of any kind that could determine an outcome of a football game, especially one with first place implications, with playoff implications, because these are two teams that stand right now that will be in the playoffs. I mean, last year Atlanta had a pretty bad collapse after starting 5-0, but right now these are two teams that will be in the playoffs. So the fact that game-changing penalties aren't reviewable, the fact that baseball's got a better grasp on that than football does is very interesting. That's ridiculous. Number 4, Odell Beckham. He has been in the news a lot over the last couple of years. His feud with Josh Norman last year, and this year he's just being weird. He had an incident with the kicking net. He's talking a lot. He's drawing a lot of unnecessary penalties. And if we go back to last year, when Norman was in Carolina and they had that highly publicized matchup, he's just, last couple of, great receiver, but he's getting out of control. Whether it be Eli Manning or Ben McAdoo, the coach, somebody's got to say, hey, like, you're hurting this team. We're not in first place right now. We need every yard, every play we can get, and you're not helping. And I understand, you got to stick up for your teammates, because Eli Manning said, hey, I'm getting kind of sick of it when he's not making plays. What's he supposed to say? How can you say, oh, it's okay if he costs us the yards as long as he's making play? No, because if he's costing yards, he's not making plays. If he makes a 20-yard catch, but then there's a 15-yard penalty, you're literally not moving. Like, you're not going anywhere. You're going backwards. You might get a little bit of a gain, but you're not doing anything. So he's got to get under control, and I support what Eli said and what Ben McAdoo said. They said we got to get it under control. He's got to know the situation, and that's what the NFL is. Know the situation. We've seen a lot of unnecessary penalties the last couple of years, especially. Know the situation. And so Odell Beckham, what he's doing right now is ridiculous. Number 5. And this was a lesser-known story. There's a small college out there, Millikan University. They came out. They were playing a game, and well, I shouldn't say they came out, because with the highly publicized national anthem protest around football right now, apparently the Millikan University players decided to protest the anthem as a team by staying in the locker room until the anthem was over. Except one guy that walked out there by himself and stood on that sideline by himself to pay respect, to put his hand on his heart, to do the whole thing. This is infuriating to me, because I'm all for team unity, I'm all for this. But as a team, if this team decided, to sit out the protest, I respect your right to free speech, do whatever you want. I've made my feelings on the protest perfectly clear. But as a team, if one guy on your team decides, hey, like, I feel like I need to go do this, and, it's our country. The fact that all but one would go out, that would sit out, and they would let that guy go out by himself, that says more about a lack of team unity than it does about having team unity, because while the entire 40 men, 53 men, while the entire team stayed in, one guy went out and they let him do it. They said, oh yeah, you go out by yourself. So they singled him out. He didn't do that. He did what he thought was right. I mean, you could argue both ways, but I think it's much more disrespectful to allow one guy to go out by himself and not stand with him than to stay inside. It takes a lot more courage to do something than it does to not. And yeah, like I said, you could make this argument both ways. But when I saw that one guy by himself, I felt for him. I felt for that one guy that was out there by himself. The fact that Millikan University players would let that happen would really put their pride at that moment over, because that's what this anthem thing is. It's all about pride, in my opinion. The fact that they put their pride over this one guy, the fact that there's only one guy saddens me that would go out there and stand for the anthem. That saddens me. But it's ridiculous that he was the only one that his teammates let him go out there by himself. Number 6, in Romans Ridiculous 6, an Ontario judge was trying recently to, in court, get the Indians logo banned. And it was just recently ruled that the case was thrown out. It was dropped. It's not going to happen. But it all happened recently. And what's ridiculous to me is this story broke when Toronto was down 2-0 in the ALCS. And there's been a lot of things in recent years about the Indians mascot, the Redskins, the Braves, the Blackhawks, they're offensive logos. That's what the opinion has been of them. And for multiple reasons, this is on the list. One, first of all, bringing that up in the playoffs when you're losing the series is like saying, oh, well, if we get their logo thrown out, then they forfeit the series and we win. But you were down 2-0. So it's like similar to the Dez situation. It's a sore loser. It's you're losing credit. 2, the Braves, the Redskins, the Indians. First of all, the Indians have been the Cleveland Indians since 1915. The Atlanta Braves have been the Atlanta Braves since 1966. The Redskins have been around. The Blackhawks have been around. And nobody said anything until about 3 or 4 years ago that this was offensive, that this was a problem, that this needed to be changed. Why now? And an Ontario judge and all this, like, come on, you come off as a sore loser. Plus, banning these logos makes no sense to me because they've been around forever and nobody said anything until recently. That's ridiculous. That wraps up Romans Ridiculous 6. And before I say goodbye here, I just want to say one quick thing. Josh Brown, the kicker for the New York Giants, was asked not to travel with the team for their game in London this week because of reports of multiple incidences of domestic abuse against his wife. I think the league is so inconsistent with these types of things. They punish Ray Rice, and he's been out of the league for 2 years now, and as of right now, Josh Brown is still on the Giants team in the NFL. All the sorts of things. They've had a they said first offense of these types of things you get 6-game suspension, yet he's yet to be suspended. It's a model of inconsistency in the NFL right now. We talk more about Odell and what he does being goofy on the field than we do about this. And as I talked about Odell earlier, but there's a lot of problems going on with the Giants, I guess, off the field. And it's an NFL problem because I think Goodell's got too much power. I think their rules on domestic violence are too unclear, and there needs to be a change. There needs to be definitive. If evidence comes out that you did this because Josh Brown admitted to being a serial abuser. Those were his words. Serial abuser. And he's today still on the Giants roster. He's not traveling with them, but he's on their roster. He hasn't been released. And there is no place for that. Whether Greg Hardy, Josh Brown, Ray Rice, no place for that in the NFL, in any other sport, in this country anywhere. There's no excuse for domestic violence. And so the NFL needs to figure out what they're doing with Josh Brown and what they're doing with their domestic violence protocols, with their procedures, because obviously they haven't figured it out. Anyway, that's all the time I have for today. Game 6 of the NLCS is tomorrow. We'll see if either the Cubs can close it out or the Dodgers can force a Game 7. Will we see Clayton Kershaw? I don't know, but the Indians are waiting for him. World Series starts on Tuesday. And Vin Scully showed up in Game 5 to kick off the game at Dodger Stadium. So we'll have to see if there are any other surprises in the league. Oh, I almost forgot. This week's Emperor of the Week, Andrew Miller, the relief pitcher for the Cleveland Indians. And I almost never choose a relief pitcher because they're kind of the unsung heroes. They're kind of, if they're doing their job, you don't notice them, like umpires, like kickers, like those types of guys. But I had to give Andrew Miller Emperor of the Week. In the last week or so, in the postseason, so far he has 11 2/3 innings pitched, 5 hits, no runs, 21 strikeouts. He's got 1 win and 1 save in that span, and obviously, because he's no runs, he's got a 0 ERA. Andrew Miller's first 17 outs were all by strikeout. The first 17 outs he recorded in the postseason were all by strikeout. And at the time that he had 9 innings pitched, he had 21 strikeouts, he had 20 strikeouts, which was the most by anyone in a 9-game after 9 innings in postseason history. So because of that, Andrew Miller is my Emperor of the Week this week. I honorable mention goes to Clayton Kershaw for pitching 4 times in a 10-game period, earning a couple of wins and his first career save, and having an ERA in the 2s because of his notable postseason struggles throughout his career. So he gets honorable mention, but he falls short to Andrew Miller, who is this week's Emperor of the Week. Congratulations, Andrew. That's all the time I have for this week. For Empire Sports Talk, this is Roman Gennaro signing off. Have a good day.